Hezbollah and its allies rushed to reject a government lineup pressed by the Lebanese Prime Minister-designate. Is this a new political crisis in Lebanon? And how are regional players influencing the balance of power in the country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Lauren Taylor. It's been just over 12 months since politicians in Lebanon signed an agreement that saw an end to 3 years of political crisis. Now, a disagreement over power sharing is threatened to turn into yet another political standoff. Saad al-Hariri's March 14th alliance won Lebanon's parliamentary elections in June. Since then, he's been unable to agree on a coalition cabinet with the opposition. On Monday this week, he submitted his proposed cabinet list to the country's president for agreement. President Michel Sleiman has to approve the cabinet as well as choose the next prime minister. Saad al-Hariri, as the leader of the winning alliance, had been expected to be chosen. That's now being questioned by some observers as opposition leaders have been voicing their anger over those cabinet choices being made without consultation.
I don't think that action taken today gets Lebanon out of the government's formation crisis. On the contrary, it complicates it even further. Matters do not get solved this way, but rather solved through dialogue and the readiness to present concessions.
Saad al-Hariri has defended his cabinet proposal and says it respects the seat allocations previously agreed with the opposition.
I have presented His Excellency the President of the Republic with a national unity government formation of 30 seats based on the 15-10-5 formula. The formation includes all the main parliamentary blocs and preserves the balance between them. This formation is in line with the parliamentary election results that is the foundation of our democratic regime and endorses the principle of the rotation of portfolios. It also preserves the necessity to achieve harmony among cabinet members so as to have a government of national achievement and participation by all means.
Well, the current discord has echoes of the political crisis that plagued Lebanon after the assassination of its former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri in 2005. That triggered civil unrest and left Lebanon with two rival political factions. By May last year, Hezbollah had blockaded large parts of the capital. Supporters of the two blocs had begun fighting each other, bringing the country close to civil war. But this came to an end when both sides resolved to put down their arms in favour of dialogue under the Qatar-brokered Doha Agreement. Within days, a new president was successfully elected, filling a position that had been vacant for more than 6 months. This made way for elections in June this year that were won by the March 14th alliance. The key players in Lebanese politics are the March 14th alliance, that's led by Saad al-Hariri, son of Rafiq Hariri, the assassinated former Prime Minister of Lebanon. The alliance is supported by the US and Saudi Arabia. In the recent elections, it won 60 out of 128 seats in the parliament. Then there's the March 8th alliance, that's led by Hezbollah and is known to have pro-Syrian sentiments. The coalition won 57 seats in the elections. Hassan Nasrallah and Michel Aoun are some of its prominent leaders. And now a new wild card in the equation, the Progressive Socialist Party. Once a part of the March 14th alliance, it distanced itself from the coalition last month. That party is led by Walid Jumblat. It won 11 seats in the elections and has yet to confirm what direction it will be taking. Well, joining our discussion today are our guests in Beirut, political analyst Kamal Wazni. Also in Beirut, Saleh El-Mashnouk, who's a political analyst and columnist for Lebanon's An-Nahar newspaper. And in Washington, D.C., Mara Karlin. She was formerly Levant director at the U.S. Department of Defense. Well, the election was, of course, as we were hearing just now, on June the 7th. That's more than 3 months on, and still there's no government formed. Saleh El-Mashnouk, why is it so difficult?
Well, I think that the country is going through a political crisis in its own system because part of its political parties do not believe in the democratic system and the constitution on which it is based. We are a country now in some ways under political occupation because the Prime Minister-designate and the President of the Republic are not able to form a government unless Hezbollah agrees to all the conditions that it put forth for the formation of this government. After the election, Saad al-Hariri unilaterally announced that he wants a unity government. For 71 days, he agreed to have extensive consultations with all parties of the opposition. And then he did what he was supposed to do at the request of the President of the Republic, which is put forward a proposal for the unity government. The way in which the opposition parties unilaterally and directly and very aggressively rejected the very essence of the proposal clearly shows that for reasons that partly have to do with Iran's nuclear policy and its negotiations, Syria's negotiations with the United States and Saudi Arabia on the issue of the tribunal, and Michel Aoun's refusal to accept that he has lost the election, both as a March 8 coalition, but also as the former leader of a Christian majority. All these elements put together, the result is that we have re-entered a political crisis solely based on the fact that the Constitution and our democratic system is not being recognized by a large portion of the opposition.
Kamal Wasni, what was wrong with that proposition that was made by Saad al-Hariri? Why was it rejected so out of hand?
Well, Lebanon is made of that constitution that was put after the Taif and require that consultation between the political parties, and it has to be, whatever has to be proposed by the designated prime minister has to be discussed with the president of the country. What we have seen in the past day, a new precedent set with the prime minister designated. He submit the name that hasn't been discussed with the political party, hasn't been discussed with the president, is a violation, is a true violation of the Constitution, of the principle of consensus in Lebanon, and it's a way of imposing a new doctrine in Lebanese politics, that the prime minister or designated, he can name who he chooses to rule Lebanon. This process, it seems unacceptable by all political party, not by Hezbollah alone, by everybody in Lebanon. They vote, they sound their resentment for this process.
Let me just bring in Mara Karlin there. There's a clear disagreement there on the sides of this. But, I mean, they had a formula for agreeing a coalition cabinet. So why, in the end, are they then sort of bickering over who gets what job? Or was that to be expected?
It's a very good question. First of all, this is always to be expected. Lebanese cabinet formation is an incredibly difficult, complex process. It's very difficult for for anyone to understand, actually, even those who follow Lebanese politics religiously. Not only is it difficult to understand, I think at all moments, people observing the process get very nervous that one side will choose to ignite protests or ignite violence to try to get their way in the negotiations. But look, that said, this is a consensual democracy. That's what's going to happen. And as much as the March 8th coalition, like Hezbollah, like FPM and Michel Aoun, want to change what happened in the elections, they need to realize they can't change the facts. They did not win the elections. Saad Hariri is trying to work with them to form a unity government, and my guess is that will end up happening. It'll be difficult, an uphill battle, nevertheless, and I don't think one should envy either Saad Hariri's position or President Suleiman's position right now, given that he has to respond.
Let me bring in, come back in, Kamal Wasni, just on that point there. I mean, is the opposition asking for too much? I mean, they did lose the election after all, didn't they?
Oh, sure, they lost the election, but doesn't mean Lebanon is built in consensus, and actually they got less cabinet position in the government. But the fact that we have a prime minister, he imposed his own ministers and names ministers without consultation within the political party, that's unheard in Lebanon. Unless we became an emperor a feudal system and he's the emperor, then he can do that. In Lebanon, you cannot do that. In Lebanon, you have to consult with the people, and the people would designate then submit the name, and they name their own minister, and that's the way the process in Lebanon will work. Otherwise, we're violating the Taif agreement and the distribution of power, and we're giving one sect we're giving Lebanon to one sect, and that's unacceptable.
Okay, Saleh Al-Mashnouk, just to answer that point, I mean, has he been behaving like an emperor, do you think?
I mean, I honestly think it would be strongly appreciated if people do actually read the Constitution before speaking of it. I mean, what Saad al-Hariri did for 71 days is about 2 months and 10 extra days, was consult with each and every political party on who they want represented in their own government. Michel Aoun's party refused to name their ministers, and therefore Saad al-Hariri proposed 3 names, which are to be adjusted. I mean, if the opposition really wanted the formation of a unity government under the balance that was created by the elections and its results, they would simply say the following: we agree on what Saad al-Hariri has put forward, but we have objections as to the issue of the names proposed by Saad al-Hariri, and they could issue those objections to the President of the Republic. What they did, however, was outright reach and say that we do not accept what Saad al-Hariri has done. This is a violation of the Constitution.
Okay.
The Constitution is very clear. If I can make just one point clear to also the lady in Washington, there's no such thing as consensus in Lebanon's Taif agreement. It's a myth that has been promoted by media and politicians and pundits and thinkers. If you look online, wherever you want, on the actual text of the Constitution, the only time the word consensus is used is when the Council of Ministers is making the decisions. They actually try consensus. If it doesn't work, they go to vote. As for our democracy, it's very clear in the Constitution as to how it functions.
Yeah, we just don't want to get too bogged down in all the very detailed nature of complicated Lebanese politics. So I want to kind of broaden it out for our international viewers here. I mean, Marla Karlin, you talked about the danger that there's been in the past of violence on the streets simply in Lebanon if people disagree. Are we at that point, or we're coming up to that point in this situation?
I personally don't think we're at that point. I think it's not in the opposition's interest, to be frank. I mean, look, in 2006, the opposition cost Lebanon over 1,000 lives and $6 billion. There was then a year-long sit-in, which did not work in the opposition's interest either. And the only way that the opposition was really able to try to affect change was the circumstances of May 8th and those clashes, which I think it is accurate to say scared quite a few people in the country as being the closest Lebanon had been to civil war in decades. So no, I don't think we're at that point. I think what's important now is to say, all right, what next? A proposed cabinet list has been submitted. Will President Suleiman accept or reject it? And most likely, my assumption is that negotiations will continue. This is an iterative process, and it's about compromise. And I don't think any one side will be happy, but I also don't think any one side wants to prevail entirely out of fears of what that could lead to.
Okay, well, just at this point, we're just going to recap on the leaders of the coalitions who've historically allied with competing regional and international powers. So it's the March 14th alliance backed by Saudi Arabia and the US on one side versus the March 8th alliance backed by Syria and Iran on the other. Well, the coalitions fight it out within the borders of Lebanon, while the network of supporters strategize outside. Immediately after the elections, regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Syria had several rounds of talks to discuss the Lebanese government makeup. The talks highlighted the two countries' influence over the outcome. So if I could come to you, Kamal Wazni, I mean, that talk of sort of rapprochement between Syria and Saudi Arabia over Lebanon, has that all gone cold? And is it in any way a factor in this stalled process of getting a government sorted out?
Well, obviously, two important countries, two regional power, they're very important for the stability in Lebanon. And we looked forward for those consensus between Saudi Arabia and Syria to play a pivotal role in facilitating the formation of a government. And, the Speaker of the Parliament always mentioned those two countries, and it seemed that it came to a halt the process of building the trust between these countries. But I think regional power play an important role, but I think it has to do with the mentality that taking place in Lebanon. My friend saying we don't have any consensus. Yes, we have consensus of Lebanon, and if we don't have consensus, that we're looking for a very, very difficult time, because if one faction in Lebanon feel that they're there because they bought an election by money, they can rule this country without the other, then they're like mistakenly, because the one who has the majority in this election, they're the opposition and the aid of March.
So hang on a second, let me stop you there. Are you suggesting that this election was bought? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Everybody knows that but $1 billion bought this election. There's scandal everywhere. A vote cost over $2,000 to $4,000 in Zahli. We know what happened in Lebanon, but at this point, the opposition decided to put this aside for the benefit and security of the country and looking to build a consensus. And the popular vote in this election went to the aid of March. If this happened in the United States, and my friend in Washington, one vote, one man, one vote. Other than that, it will violate any constitution. So we're here talking about consensus and reconciliation, and not being monopolist over power, because in Lebanon, this will never work.
Let's just bring it back, though, to the issue that we're focusing on now, which is the influences of the regional players. Marla Cullen, you were going to jump in there. I mean, Syria and Saudi Arabia, are they hands-off at this point in the situation, or are they causing the trouble?
It's a very good question. First of all, if I could just respond to the last gentleman's comment, the 2000 elections in the U.S. had the same result, in fact, where the popular vote went one way, the Electoral College went another. It's a very similar situation, but at the end of the day, that was what prevailed. And it's the same situation with Lebanon. Parliamentary democracy prevailed. I'm sorry, but now to answer your question about the Syrians and Saudis and what role they're playing, it's important because the regional piece is very significant here. I think were there not an opening to Syria by various Arab countries, including Saudis, and by the U.S., I think, for instance, March 14th would not have seen the defection of Walid Jumblat. Look, the Syrians occupied Lebanon for decades. I don't know that one can argue that really provided a stable, secure, free, independent Lebanon. It just didn't happen. So personally, I'm very suspicious of their involvement.
Saleh al-Mashnouk, there was some sort of talk around that Saad Hariri might even visit Syria if he was if he eventually got the job properly, and that there was a talk of rapprochement between Lebanon and Syria, and this whole kind of rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and the other two countries. Can that still happen, or has all that gone cold now?
No, I mean, this issue is a principled issue. Any prime minister of Lebanon, including in the March 14th alliance, should visit Syria and try to lead the Syrian-Lebanese relations toward a healthier stage where Syria's respect of Lebanese rights and the violation of Lebanese sovereignty would stop. I mean, Fuad Sanyura had visited Syria in much tougher times in Lebanese-Syrian relations. Saad al-Hariri, when appointed prime minister, will visit Syria to discuss issues of interest to the Lebanese people. But what I want to point out more importantly is the role of Iran is being slightly neglected here. As we know, on the 20th of September, there's going to be United Nations Security Council talk on more pressure and more sanctions on Iran. The Iranian domestic political scene is very tense, and the Iranians believe that the Arabs and the Americans are up for a battle against them in the next few months. On the other hand, Syria's allies in Lebanon have spoken for the past few weeks very intensely and very roughly about the issue of the International Tribunal and the need to cancel it and put it on the shelf. As long as Syria and Iran feel like their demands have not been required on the international stage, especially in dealing with the United States, they will not allow the formation of government in Lebanon in which their allies, naturally sitting on a table with Saad al-Hariri as prime minister, would be sidelined on the general political scene.
Okay.
So what we're looking at in the next few months is if Syria gets what it wants, if Iran gets what it wants, you will see the formation of the government in Lebanon in less than 24 hours,
okay,
with the opposition's making
let me just put that very point to Kamal Wazni. Is that fair? Is it simply a case of getting these other players to agree and then suddenly there'll be, you know, like magic, there'll be a government in Lebanon?
Look, this is in regard to the Iranian, this is nonsense. The Iranians have a lot of things to worry about it, and Lebanon has nothing to do with the Iranian domestic or international negotiation with the West. We have part of the largest picture in Lebanon has to do how they distribute the cabinet in Lebanon, and obviously we're talking about very important money-making cabinet in Lebanon, like the communication was actually generate about like 1/3 of the revenue. And there is mafia, political mafia in Lebanon. They want to benefit at the expense of the country, and that's really what they're fighting about it.
But it's on that point of the telecoms ministry. I mean,
that's what it is. That's why they want the finance ministry and they want the telecom ministry and they want to privatize, and that's how they build their fortune in Lebanon by running this country to a large debt. They put over
just on the point of that,
$55 billion
on the point of the telecoms industry. Let me just ask you a quick question on the telecoms ministry. Kamal Wazni, just briefly on the telecoms ministry. Is my understanding that you want a reappointment of Gibran Bassil, who lost in the March 14th elections, and his father-in-law is Michel Aoun, who's the FPM leader. So does that not smack of political patronage and of trying to keep somebody in the job because they want to hang on to their job?
This is not the issue that is one individual can keep that post. It's about a principle that the 14th of March, especially the group that belong to the designated prime minister, they want to hold on the major ministries in Lebanon, and they want to keep the good ministry for them, and whatever left, they want to give it to everybody else. And to your surprise, even the people with the 14th of March were not giving a good ministry. There was opposition today from the Lebanese forces, from Phalange, from a lot of people, because it seemed the power has been concentrated in a very small group, and that's where it's going to make this picture very, very dark for forming this government.
Okay, we've gone back to the sort of nitty-gritty of the Lebanese politics again. I just want to widen it back out just briefly before we come to the end of the programme. Marla Karlin, will the government, I mean, how quickly can this government be formed, and are we what can the president do now? And is there a situation where you have Saad Hariri stepping down? What's your forecast for what's going to happen next in this complicated scenario?
Look, Saad Hariri, I think, has surprised in a positive way quite a few people. He prevailed in elections that across the board no one thought he was going to win. He spent over 70 days doing consultations, and he has not gone to Syria, which I do believe would really seal the cabinet. I think he's too strong. I don't actually see him stepping down. It's not in his interest. It is in his interest, however, to steer the dialogue away from the cabinet formation. I mean, as one can just see in our conversation now, it quickly becomes bogged down on details, and Lebanon's government isn't able to look beyond. And look, the UN General Assembly is coming up in a few short weeks. Will Lebanon have a government for then? How will it conduct its foreign relations with countries when it only has a caretaker government? It's an extremely awkward situation.
I'll just very briefly put that question to Saleh Al-Mashnouk. Will Lebanon have a government in time for that UN General Assembly meeting?
I strongly think it will not, and I think it has nothing to do with the nitty-gritty details of Lebanese politics. It has to do with the situation in the region, particularly the issue that you pointed out for the negotiations between Syria and Saudi Arabia. Look, this government was formed on the basis of 10-15-5, based on negotiations between Syria and Saudi Arabia, not based on negotiations inside Lebanon. So what I see, if the situation in the region does not improve in the next few weeks or even in the next few months, this country will remain under political occupation, and it will be impossible for the Prime Minister-designate or the President to form a government, unfortunately so. I'm
afraid we've run out of time. A fascinating discussion, but thank you very much to our guests for joining us on today's programme. In Beirut, Kamal Wazni and Saleh Al-Mashnouk, thank you very much. And in Washington, D.C., Marla Karlin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for watching this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome any comments and suggestions. Email them to us, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.